In Deuteronomy, there is a passage in chapter 26 of Deuteronomy, verses 1 through 11. And I don't want to read all of them to you, but I'm just going to give you the gist and then a portion of the reading. In Deuteronomy, the instructions to the people are that they are to bring the first fruits of their harvest before the Lord. But it's not just bringing the first fruits of their harvest before the Lord that they are to do. They are to bring the basket, and then they are to go to the altar of the Lord, and they shall make a confession of faith. Now, that's not what the text calls it, but they are to make this response before the Lord. Quote, "A wandering Aramaean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders. And God brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground that you, O Lord, have given me." That is the confession that is instructed of those who bring their first fruits, those Israelites who are following the codes and the laws of God. Now, reading from Paul's letter to the church at Rome, beginning with verse 5, writes Paul, "Moses writes concerning the righteousness that comes from the law, that the person who does these things will live by them. But the righteousness that comes from faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will ascend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, and your lips, on your lips and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart, and so is justified. And one confesses with the mouth, and so is saved. The scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, and is generous to all who call on the Lord. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? And it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. So, how many of you know that I just love marketing? How many of you have that, the t-shirts, you know, I mean, David has his on, the Palm Springs shirt. Yeah, and how many of you have those bags, those canvas bags that I made that have do no harm, do all good you can, stay in love with God? And there were big canvas bags and small canvas bags. And how many of you have the rainbow bracelets that say come experience God's yes? So marketing, I love marketing. And this one I did, this is
Isaiah 52, how beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of those who bring good news. So I said we were the beautiful feet people. And so I took this hat, not this particular one, because I have several, but I took this to Guatemala with me, and I had people saying, what does that mean? What's that? What does the beautiful feet people mean? And so I was able to proclaim to them, to tell them the story of how beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of those who proclaim the good news. Paul's letter to the church in Rome is trying to help the people in Rome understand the difference between following the law codes and proclaiming one's faith. Now, I have to tell you that when I started to read this, there was this image that came into my head. And you all know that I'm a Wizard of Oz crazy person. I mean, I love the Wizard of Oz. And it was, the year 1939 in Hollywood was the year of incredible films. And the film The Wizard of Oz was released in 1939. Now, because the whole Gilligan's Island reference last week in the sermon went over so many of your heads, I have to ask if there's anybody here who's never seen The Wizard of Oz. Okay. There is a scene in the film The Wizard of Oz where the Scarecrow and Dorothy and Toto and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion. Did you know in the book about the Cowardly Lion written by the same fellow who wrote Wicked, his name is Burr? I loved reading that book. Okay. The Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and Dorothy and Toto, they're all walking through the enchanted forest. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the full version of The Wizard of Oz, because there is a section that's taken out of the film. It was the section where the song about the jitterbug. Anybody remember the song about the jitterbug? Probably not. I do. I saw that, but it was deleted from the film. And Dorothy sings this song about the jitterbugs. They're walking through the enchanted forest, and they're all very, what's that sound? What's that sound I heard? And we know, too, that there's a flash to who the WWE, no, it's not the World Wrestling Center. It's WWE, the Wicked Witch of the East. West. Sorry, WWW. The Wicked Witch of the West is peering out, and she's saying, I'm going to get that girl. And she's planning on sending the flying monkeys, and she sends the flying monkeys after Dorothy, and they attack them in the enchanted forest. They take Dorothy away, and the next thing we see is the scene where the Scarecrow's innards have been torn out, and the Cowardly Lion is down on his knees, paws tight together, eyes closed shut, looking up, saying, I do believe in spooks, 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 I do believe in spooks. Why? Why? Why is he making this confession of faith of sorts about there being spooks, ghosts that are going to haunt him? Why? Why would he lift these words up and say, I do believe in you? Because it is the job description of ghosts to haunt. And for some reason, the Cowardly Lion believes that if he makes this confession in the existence of these ghosts, that somehow he will appease them, and somehow he will keep them from harming him. Because he believes that the nature of ghosts is a capricious nature. He believes that if he says this mantra, he says these magical words, he says these words, that somehow he will be able to control the ghosts. Are you with me? One of the commentators that I read about the passages for today talked about how living by the law was a way of not necessarily putting one's trust in God, but putting one's trust in exercises that would control God. Now, if you believe that God is capricious and God has ambivalent feelings toward humankind, then you're going to try to figure out ways to get God to be good to you, nice to you. Exactly. If you believe that God is capricious, if you believe that God gets angry, if you believe that God is wrathful, if you believe that God makes things happen to human beings just to make their lives miserable. So, working and following the law was a way to keep God, like the cowardly lion, hopefully appeased, and to control God's behavior. I'm not being critical of Judaism. I'm just being open to the fact that the way we understand things sometimes is not what the intention of the original thing was. The laws in Judaism were very sane laws. They were there for a good purpose, but they became something that was, if I do this thing, if I do this dance, if I do this gyration, if I make this sacrifice, if I do this, then I will be on the right side of God. God wasn't given any credit. There was no trust in God. It was just, this is what I got to do to stay on the right side of God. Paul is trying to tell the Romans that believing in God, trusting in God, is something that must come from the center of one's soul. And it must be an absolute understanding that you have that God is indeed trustworthy. That God is not somebody we have to manipulate by our actions, by our decisions to say this particular creed, or say this particular set of prayers, or do this particular give this amount of money to the church, that if we do all of these things, if we do this work, we will somehow be able to control the blessings of God. Now, I tell you, I'm a Yankee. I was brought up in the midst of the Puritan ethic, understanding that anything I obtained in this life, I obtained through hard work. You know how to complete the sentence? Say it right out loud. Hard work. If I have a house, if I have a car, if I have food on my table, if I have the luxury of children and pets, I did that because I planned well and I worked hard. I did that because of the benefit of having very good role models, parents who were very good role models, or grandparents who were very good role models, who made sure I got a good education and made sure I lived by that Puritan work ethic. Where is God in that scenario? Where is my trust or my faith in God in all of that? I still believe that I have a home, and I have a car, and I have a job, and I have work because I'm willing to work for it. But I don't have the power or the stamina or the wherewithal or the soul or the spirit to do it without God in the very middle of my being, without God in my soul. I learned that fairly late in my youth. I was almost 30 years old when I finally figured that out. But I was called, and Paul talks about this, he says, how are people going to know about the good news righteousness of God if there is no one to proclaim it? How are they going to know? How are they going to believe if there is no one to tell them about it, about God? And Paul is the perfect example of the one who came to his belief and to his faith and to his understanding that God is not about living and working and striving to follow the rules. God is about trusting in the very presence of God's love. God is about trusting in the presence of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. God is about the one who has given us life beyond our imagination through our understanding of Christ's sacrifice and through our trust, our absolute trust in that one statement. Paul says, we are justified by faith and we are redeemed. We are saved by our belief that God raised Jesus from the dead. We are saved by our faith, by our trust that God raised Jesus from the dead. That's the beginning. But I say to you, that's just the beginning. That justification by faith, that willingness to say, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sake. I believe in Jesus Christ. That is just the beginning of our work as people of faith. That's just the first step. The second step is living out that faith. Understanding what it means in the center of our souls and being able to model that and live that in the presence of other people. How many of you have actually looked at these affirmations of faith? You know, there are a whole pile of them in the hymnal, and pondered them and looked through them. How many of you have ever sat down and shared them with your child? Has Sierra ever read one? How many have Oliver and Alex ever read one? Summer, have you sat down? You did with me in the confirmation class, sat down and read these affirmations of faith, but have you pondered them? Have you pondered what they mean for your life and your everyday? We say these affirmations of faith. We say these words, but when they are only words, they do nothing for us or for the world. Let's make let's make the words live. Let us be the beautiful feet